Alright, so welcome back to another exotic armor tier list. Last video we did Titan, and this video we're going to move on to Warlock. Warlock has a bit more exotic diversity than Titan, I would say. Like I said, Titan is pretty much glued to Synthos 99% of the time in most endgame content in Season of the Witch. Warlock is a little bit more diverse, and we're going to talk about exactly why in just a second. As usual, compared to the other exotic armor tier list, we're going to be tiering S through F, and I have not labeled the tiers this time around. Like I mentioned in the Titan list, I think labeling the tiers kind of boxes them in. Just think of the tiers as big groups with power spike differences between each tier. F tier tends to be like PvP exotics that are like flat out useless or actually bad for your gameplay, and then S tier is like meta defining, like crazy transformative exotics. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. So first off, we have Aeon Soul, I believe. Yeah, Aeon Soul. I kind of explained what Aeons do in the previous tier list on Titan, so you can kind of check out that timestamp there if you want. But I think, Aeons are, they're good. The only problem with Aeons on Warlock is that Cenotaph exists on Warlock. Cenotaph is a ranged option. It allows you to clearly mark a single target so that your teammates can kill it. And you also get special ammo off of killing a target. And trace rifles are used plenty of the time in in-game content. So Cenotaph is, I would say, a more potent exotic in terms of generating ammo. Now, that being said, Aeons, of course, have some of the unique properties from the different sects that give you special effects. Now, those effects are generally a little bit wonky and a little bit gimmicky to take advantage of and are very niche. So I'm not going to put that over Cenotaph. I think Cenotaph is generally the better exotic than Aeons on Warlock. And so that's actually going to pull Aeon viability down compared to the other two classes, right? So on the other two classes, not to spoil anything, but obviously Titan and Hunter, Aeons are like A tier-ish exotics. On Warlock, I'm actually going to place Aeons in the B tier. They're going to be at the top of B tier. They're not bad, but I'm going to place them at the top of B tier. Okay. Next up, we have Apotheosis Veil. Okay, so Apotheosis Veil is it was used back in the day when people would throw a scatter grenade, do a Nova Bomb, and then throw another scatter grenade for a big burst of damage. These days, that's not really like a thing that's important or useful now that our weapons are much stronger, and grenades are like not the biggest deal in the world. You can get them back very quickly without having to use your super or dedicate an exotic for it specifically. That being said, it does boost your ally class ability regeneration by a small amount within a relatively large radius around you, which is something I didn't know until I started making this tier list. So pretty cool, pretty cool effect. That's a very, very small regen increase, but it is there nonetheless. That being said, this is an extremely boxed in exotic. There's really not much to do with it. It's not like super useful. People are saying it's like, some people are thinking it's good on Broodweaver for damage. It's really not with Threat of Generation. So yeah, there's not really a reason to use Apotheosis Veil like ever. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the D tier because it does something, but it's not like bad. It's not a bad thing that it does. It's not like completely net zero use. Okay, next up we have Astrocyte Verse. So Astrocyte Verse got a rework recently so that it makes enemies volatile after you blink near them. Which is kind of cool, it's one of the easiest ways to apply volatile to enemies. That being said, having to go near enemies and then blink away from them is kind of like a weird way to apply volatile. So really what Astrocyte Verse is mainly used for is not that, but rather the increased blink distance, as well as the kind of QOL effects that you get after coming out of blink that you normally don't have. So Astrocyte is used in some speedruns. For example, it was used in Levy back in the day to blink through Gauntlet. It's also used currently in Last Wish to blink through the taken walls during the vault encounter more easily. And there's a variety of other possible uses for blink because it's a unique jump ability that allows you to kind of teleport rather than move quickly and hit possibly a barrier or an object. So, it has some use in speedrunning, but it's very, very niche. And much like Dune Marchers, which pretty much only has use in speedrunning, I'm going to place it in a similar tier. We're going to place it in the C tier. Okay. Next up, let's talk about Ballidorse Wrathweavers. So Ballidorse Wrathweavers, I think, are still a little bit underrated. A lot of people have kind of failed to understand that this exotic is not a damage super exotic, okay? You're not using Winter's Wrath to do damage with this thing, and please don't, because Winter's Wrath is really bad for damage. It is used in two things right now. Number one, It is used in Crota's End because there is a strategy where you kill the wizards in Irute through the wall, and Ballidorse allows you to one-shot them rather than two-shot them with your stasis projectiles more consistently. That's number one. Pretty niche, I understand. Number two is the more popular use though, and that is that Ballidorse provides one of the only stackable weapon damage boosts that does not require you to... it stacks with surges, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that's really good because Cold Comfort is one of the highest burst damage sources in the game, and if you have a Ballidorse user on your team, not only do you benefit from stasis surges, but you also benefit from an extra 15% multiplicative bonus on top of that. So, you know, with Cold Comfort being one of the best burst damage sources in the game, Ballidorse being, you know, just use your super and then you can end your super manually by waiting it out, or you can self-proc, or you can swap subclasses, whatever. Very easy way for someone like your galley user to just give everyone free damage, especially in a sandbox where your super is not super important anyway. So not having an extra needle storm on your team, it's definitely worth using Ballidorse. That being said, pretty niche, right? Like you're not going to do this on a day one most of the time, and unless you're like extremely coordinated. And even in speedruns, like it's often, you know, more work than it's worth, you know, using, because Cold Comfort is not always used in raid bosses or dungeon bosses in speedruns. But Ballidorse is, you know, it's still useful. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the... Where did we put Ballidorse, actually? That's a good question. Ballidorse is in the B tier. And I think we're gonna go ahead and place it right underneath Aeon's. Yeah, Ballidorse is ranked 15th. Okay, next up we have Boots of the Assembler. Now, Boots of the Assembler is cool, right? It has basically two uses, right? It is a weaponless 35% buff to your teammates every time a Seeker hits them if you're in an Emp Rift. Now, unfortunately, that buff duration is only 5 seconds, and it doesn't target people that are standing inside of a well, which is really unfortunate because it's not just like, hey, I can place my Emp Rift in a well and my teammates will randomly just get more damage for free. It's not really like that. It's really unfortunate that the exotic interacts this way, otherwise it would be probably more useful. And it's also unfortunate that the Blessing of the Sky buff is only 35, sorry, not only 35, is only 5 seconds long, rather than the full 10 seconds that you would get from something like Lumina. So unfortunately, Lumina is definitely a much more consistent 35% buff. It targets people in well, it's 10 seconds long, and you can target individual players rather than waiting for a Seeker to hit them. So Boots of the Assembler is really rather quite niche. There are very few encounters in speedrunning and outside of speedrunning in endgame content where you would really use Boots of the Assembler. It does provide you with an extended rift duration, and it's also very useful for getting noble rounds to Lumina. Like it gives noble rounds to Lumina without having to get any kills. So for example, if you're doing an encounter where you need to give yourself full Lumina noble rounds, and you don't want to kill any enemies because you're saving them for something, or you want your teammates to get those kills, then it can be kind of helpful. So a good example is Crota. Like while you're waiting for that Crota star animation to happen, you can place a Boots of the Assembler's Rift if you're on Lumina, and like Bequest, you'll have full Lumina, and then you can switch to another exotic. So that being said, I kind of explained a lot of what Boots of the Assembler is used for. It's pretty niche though, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. I think it is... where did I put it? I think I put it above... Yeah, it's above Ballidorse, but below Aeon's. And it is ranked 11th. Okay, let's move on to Briarbinds. Briarbinds is, I think, the most recently released Warlock exotic. Basically, this is completely built around Child of the Old Gods. Number one, your Void Souls last longer, right? So this is really good for debuff extension. This is like the debuff extension exotic. And number two, you can rotate your Void Souls around, you can redeploy them, and you can have even like multiple up at the same time. So this is actually quite good, right? It's a good exotic for debuff extension specifically. So Void Souls in general are not like the strongest thing ever, but if you have a Felwinter's finish or you have a Tractor user, you can actually use Briarbinds to essentially indefinitely extend debuffs. So for example, I think Llama has a video where he like keeps a debuff on a mini boss for like 2 minutes straight or something, which is pretty cool, right? It's very niche, but it is a pretty cool exotic with a pretty unique use. That being said, currently right now, no one has implemented Briarbinds in any like legitimate real strategy. I think my team might implement it on like Irute or something, but the kill is really not long and it's probably going to not be useful compared to just using regular Void Soul. So, oh, is it 10 minutes? Okay, apparently it was 10 minutes, not even 2 minutes. Okay, great. So now you know how potent it is. That being said, there's very, very few damage scenarios where you need a debuff on a boss for that long. And of course, you're sacrificing another exotic and you're sacrificing, you know, being on something else that's not Void or just being on like Ophits or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and put Briarbinds at the very top of C tier. It's niche, but no one's really found a use for it yet, right? If someone had found a use for it, it'd probably be in B tier, but it's in C tier. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and talk about Cenotaph Mask. So Cenotaph Mask is also a relatively recent addition to the game. Cenotaph Mask is, like I mentioned with Aeons, the best ammo generating exotic on Warlock. This thing is fantastic. This thing is an amazing exotic. First of all, it boosts trace rifles, so it auto reloads trace rifles, which is nice for QOL, but that's not the main draw of this exotic. You get heavy ammo upon marking any mini boss plus enemy, and your teammates kill it, and then you also get special ammo for your trace, right? So this is like when the div user back in the day would run like Aeons or something, and they'd run special finishers, so they'd keep getting div ammo. Cenotaph kind of has that capability baked into it already, and it's just a great exotic overall. It's like Aeons, except it's safe. You can do it from range. Your teammates can stack it multiple times on a single target, whereas Aeon, you can only do it on the person that finished the target. You can have, a lot of people don't know this for some reason, I think this has been disseminated quite a lot, but you can have, like, in a raid, for example, you can have all 6 players or 5 players mark a single target, and then have someone Aeon finish that target that is not marking it, and it will drop 5 bricks minimum for everyone, right? So it stacks with player count, it stacks to full fire team size. Cenotaph is, the easiest way to get a crap load of heavy ammo off of a single mini boss. So it scales beautifully into large size fire teams, and it works wonderfully in stuff like GMs as well. The only thing this thing isn't good at is solo content, obviously, but you're not going to be using Aeons in solo content either. But yeah, this exotic is, I would say, so gameplay defining, and it has pushed Warlocks, for example, into GM speedrunning territory even more so now if you're using rockets. And I think it's shifted gameplay style so much that I'm going to put it in the S tier. I'm going to put it in the S tier. I think it is a very, very good exotic. I think it's probably the best Warlock exotic right now overall. And yeah, we're going to move on. Next up, we have Chromatic Fire. Okay, so Chromatic Fire is, it's unfortunately the way Chromatic Fire works is that, first of all, the effect of the explosion that you get off of kinetic precision kills is very, very minimal. Okay, I tried taking this thing into a GM because I was kind of curious. I was like, okay, well, it doesn't really say, how much damage it does like overall, and I don't really get a sense of it. So I tried using it in a GM, and first of all, the explosion is tiny. It is a tiny explosion and does, dude, in a GM, this thing was doing like 1/3 of a red bar's health, maybe like 1/4 of a red bar's health. Like, the damage is pitiful. Okay. And that's all it does. It basically just gives all of your kinetic weapons like Firefly, except it's like elemental Firefly, so it matches your subclass. And that's like, I don't know. It's such a weak effect. I just don't see this thing being used in endgame content whatsoever. I put it in the F tier. It's literally like, it's like just giving your weapons like Firefly, and you're not generally getting a lot of kinetic precision kills in most optimal endgame content. So yeah, this thing is just, it was so disappointing, man. I tried using this thing in a GM, just like test its damage. Oh man, it was rough. It was truly rough. Okay. Next up we have Claws of Ahamkara. So Claws of Ahamkara, I didn't actually know this, by the way. It gives you a copy of Heavy Handed, so you get free orbs on powered melee kills, and it just gives you 2 melee charges. Now, that's really niche, right? There's very few scenarios on Warlock where you would just want an extra melee charge. The only thing I can really think about is maybe like having multiple snaps, or maybe like multiple celestial fires for extra radiant procs in some time limited encounters, but that's pretty niche. Is it as useless as something like Chromatic? I don't think so, but I think it's barely edges it over the F tier. So there's definitely some niche aspect to Claws of Ahamkara. I think they changed it to interact with Penumbral Blast on Stasis Warlock, but I don't think anyone cares. So yeah, I think it definitely has like some potential. Any double ability charge exotic has some potential for build crafting or some unique circumstance, which kind of puts it over the F tier. But again, this is very, very extremely situational. Okay, Contraverse Hold. Contraverse Hold, it's a fan favorite. I'm sure a lot of you have seen, the Esoteric solo. This thing used to be glued to Esoteric's body whenever he was doing like a solo GM back in the day. Very, very consistent exotic. It now has Devour attached to it. The only problem is that Destiny 2 has moved in such an offensive direction from when this exotic was the top of the meta on Warlock that it's kind of been overshadowed, right? Because first of all, you can only really handle one vortex grenade at a time on Contraverse. You're rarely throwing two at a time, right? You only really can throw one at a time. And the vortex is pretty big. You know, it definitely stuns enemies because, you know, they're being pushed around and sucked around and stuff, and you can weaken them. And, you know, it definitely does decent damage, but there's just other abilities. There's other gameplay loops that do its job, but better and over a larger radius, right? So while Contraverse is a very consistent exotic, and you can definitely do stuff like solo gems on it still, right? And Void Warlock is as good as it's ever been, right? I mean, other stuff has overshadowed it, but it's been buffed since its older state. It has Devour on charged Vortex Grenades, and you have Invis Finisher, you have Weaken Nades, you have, you know, Void Soul. There's all this stuff you can do, but it's like Void Warlock has kind of fallen by the wayside in terms of survivability. Like Solar Warlock has just been buffed so much, and it's just not as potent. You know, it's just not as potent. So I'm gonna go ahead and put Contraverse. You know, I kind of sounded pretty depressed there, but we're not gonna like put it at the bottom of the list or anything. We're gonna put it in the B tier, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it right above Boots, right there. Okay. Next up, we have Crown of Tempests. So Crown of Tempests is an Arc Warlock exotic. I think it was right under. I don't know why I didn't just like scroll. Crown of Tempest is it's a competitor with Fallen Sunstar. So we're gonna basically be comparing this thing with Fallen Sunstar. And the way it works is any Arc ability or Jolt kills basically give you regen, stacking regen bonuses. It's like it's kind of like Hoyle, I guess, except it's not on ability use, it's on ability kills, and it just stacks up over time. And it's like it's okay, but again, like I've mentioned in the past, anything that requires kills rather than hits or damage is not going to be as strong in endgame content if we're talking about like endgame utility. And of course, if we're talking about content where the enemies are not bulky, like speedrunning, Crown of Tempest doesn't really fit into that narrative either. So I'm going to go ahead and put Crown of Tempest in the... where did I put it? In the C tier, I believe. Yeah, in the C tier. Underneath Astrocyte Verse. Okay, next up we have Dawn Chorus. I'm going to stop Control Fing. I'm just going to scroll down. Next up we have Dawn Chorus. Okay, so Dawn Chorus, I think Daybreak on Dawn Chorus is a little bit underrated. People completely write it off as being completely useless. If you're on Solar Warlock, I mean, like, the damage isn't horrible, right? The damage isn't horrible, and like the ad clear potential isn't horrible either. I'm not saying it's good. There's definitely better options out there in terms of ad clear supers and ad clear weapons. But the damage that Daybreak does with Dawn Chorus active is not like horrible or anything like that. Scorch dealing extra damage is, I don't think that's something that anyone finds really particularly useful. Yeah, but there's really just no place for this exotic. And unfortunately, on Solar Warlock, it forces you to really use Daybreak over well if you want to fully make use of the exotic, which I think is a step down, right? That's kind of forcing you, that's boxing you into a choice that is subpar, right? Like worse than just playing well without an exotic. So I'm gonna go and put that in the F tier. Definitely top of F tier, but it's definitely in the F tier. Okay. Next up we have I Have Another World. Yeah, I Have Another World. Okay. So I Have Another World, I think is a little bit underrated. It's basically like a super vanilla exotic. The marking targets thing is like useless in PvE, but it does give you a flat base 50% boost to all of your regen rates for all of your abilities besides your super. So if you're ever in a scenario where you just need to get your like grenade back quickly in something like a speedrun, for example, if you're like on a skip and you just need your grenade back for before you're, you know, go on a transition or something, I Have Another World does that pretty well. Doesn't require you to kill anything. It's very straightforward, just like a flat boost to your regen. It's not used for anything besides that though, because if you are playing into your abilities, you are much more likely to be using something like Nezarec Sin or Verity's Brow or Vesper of Radius, all of which provide bonuses that are much higher than 50%. Even if they do require some involvement, that involvement is relatively minimal and much more effective than something like I Have Another World. So I'm going to go ahead and place I Have Another World in the D tier. It's going to be above Apotheosis Veil, definitely more useful than Apotheosis Veil, but below the C tier. All right, next up we have Fallen Sunstar. Fallen Sunstar, there's been some debate in my chat as well as in other places in D2 over whether Crown of Tempest versus Fallen Sunstar is better. In my opinion, after reviewing the footage, the data, the gameplay, right, the chatters, the opinions, and of course, just generally speaking, Fallen Sunstar does not require kills, it just requires traces. And you can get ionic traces from a variety of sources that do not require kills. For example, Cold Heart. For example, your teammates' pulse grenades on like Arc Titan giving you traces. There's a variety of trace sources that do not require kills. And Fallen Sunstar also grants your enemies, or not your enemies, your allies near you, energy, right? Ability energy. So it kind of plays into both aspects. Now, I'm not saying it's the best Arc Warlock exotic necessarily. I think that honor belongs to Vesper. And I'm also not saying that this exotic is game-changing or anything like that. But I do think it is a little bit better than Crown of Tempests. So as a result, as being the better of the ability regen exotics on Arc Warlock, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier. And I think I'm going to place it right underneath Aeon Soul. Aeon Soul. Okay. Next up, we have Felwinter's Helm. Felwinter's Helm is, I think it's underrated by people who don't speedrun, and I think it's overrated by people who use it in quirky builds. Felwinter's Helm, like finishing an enemy to debuff stuff near it, is very useful in some like solo content. Like if you're soloing a dungeon on Warlock and you need a debuff and you don't want to sacrifice your heavy by using Tractor, Felwinter's Helm is the way to get that debuff. It's a full debuff, 30% just for finishing something or getting a powered melee kill. Usually you're going to be using a finisher. And if it's like a mini boss, which a lot of, you know, dungeon encounters have mini bosses, think like Ekthar, think like, you know, Zolmak, sorry, the pit boss, I'm forgetting. Zolmak, all of these bosses, you know, they all have mini bosses near them that can be finished. And the debuff is quite long. The debuff is quite long, and you can extend it very, very easily given how long it is and how big the range is from the finisher. So it's usable in raid speedruns, usable in dungeon speedruns, usable in solo content. I think Felwinter's Helm is a little bit versatile in that regard. That being said, it does require you to have a finishable enemy that is, you know, major / mini boss plus for it to be useful in terms of duration. And it's also, that's basically all it's good for. Like, I don't think Felwinter's Helm is good as a neutral exotic for like debuffing enemies as you go around powered meleeing them. So yeah, it's basically it's just a debuff exotic, which is good. It's like the best debuff exotic there is. It loses you the least damage. It doesn't require anyone to be on Tractor or something like that. So if you're in an encounter and you want to do the most damage possible, Felwinter's Helm is going to be the exotic that you want to use. So yeah, I'm gonna put that in the B tier. It's a solid exotic, definitely niche, but it has its niche, very, very solid. We're gonna put that underneath Boots of the Assembler right here. Okay. Next up, we have Geomag Stabilizers. Okay, Geomaggingtons. Geomags, after they got their topping off Chaos Reach, almost ready, perk removed for PvP reasons, they got a slight rebuff / you know, buff, where you get Chaos Reach energy on ionic traces. They also obviously extend Chaos Reach duration, as I'm sure you know. Unfortunately, Chaos Reach is sort of a roaming super-ish, because you're kind of stuck in the super for a long time and it doesn't do its damage in one big burst, and its DPS is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Also, a lot of people seem to stick by Chaos Reach as like a good ad clear super. I kind of disagree. Even with the kind of jolt changes and the lightning strikes and stuff like that, I still don't think Chaos Reach is that good of an ad clear super. I'd honestly rather be on Stormtrance. I guess it's good at range, but like, I don't know, like it's less effective than just shooting them with like wolf hacks. I don't know. Chaos Reach I think is strongly overrated, and as a result I think Geomags are also pretty overrated. I don't see this thing kind of making a return to endgame meta in general for, I don't know, for a while, I guess. I don't even think, yeah, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where I'd really want to use Geomags, and I can't really think of one. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the C tier. We're gonna put it underneath Crown, and we are going to move on. Okay, next up we have Getaway Artist. Getaway Artist is kind of nice. It makes it so that your overcharged Arc Souls give you 1/20th of your grenade back every time they hit something, and it's once per burst. So, you know, your Arc Soul lasts like 20 seconds. It's shooting like, you know, I think it's even more than, I think it's around once per second. So you get your entire grenade back just from walking around, right? And that being said, it's like, what does this exotic do that Arc Warlock doesn't already do at base? Not much, right? It gives you grenade energy, but that grenade energy, you kind of have to convert it into an Arc Soul to make use of it. So there are Arc exotics out there that give you a lot of grenades, and you already have Arc Soul by default as an aspect. So, you know, Getaway Artist is kind of questionable at best in terms of its endgame viability, especially given the kind of relatively diverse array of exotics that Arc Warlock has access to that are good with it. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the D tier. We're going to put it, I believe, at the top of D tier for now. Yeah, it's ranked 28th? Yeah, 28th. And we're going to leave it at that. Okay. Next up, we have Karnstein Armlets. Karnstein Armlets, I believe they're getting a buff next season, so we'll probably move them around. They're getting solar verbs instead of just what they have right now. That being said, Karnstein Armlets require you to melee enemies to get health and also healing that is worse than Restoration Tier 1 right now. And so in their current state, I mean, people used to cite these exotics as being good for survivability. I kind of disagree. I don't, I mean, I guess glaives trigger their effect, so that's fine, I guess, but there are better ways to survive on Warlock, right? You have Devour, which is baked into a subclass. You have Restoration, which is, again, baked into a subclass. You don't need Karnstein to help you survive. There are other exotics that will help you kill the enemies that are trying to kill you rather than trying to melee them. So I'm going to go ahead and put Karnstein in the D tier as well. We're going to put them right underneath Getaway Artist. They're ranked 29th. And we are going to move on. We're going to move on to Lunafaction Boots. So Lunafaction Boots, they're very niche, but I would say their niche is so common, right? They're very built and designed for one thing. They're not really a neutral exotic. You're not going to use them in GMs. But their purpose is so commonly understood and so frequently used, especially in the past when double slugs were used, and that was kind of an important thing to have range. They were basically glued to every warlock when it comes to raids. Now, that being said, Lunafaction Boots in today's meta are not as important anymore because a lot of the damage strategies today don't require fast reloads. They rely on automatic reloads, and they don't require range either because we're using stuff like Izzy, we're using stuff like rockets. You don't really need range on those weapons. So Lunafactions are not as important as they used to be, but I think they're still a quintessential part of being a warlock and helping your team. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in the A tier just because of how commonly they're used and how, widely applicable that they are. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about, I think that's Mantle of Battle Harmony, isn't it? Yeah, Mantle of Battle Harmony. So Mantle of Battle Harmony is like, it's an exotic focused around super generation. If you get a weapon subclass match kill, you get a little bit of super. There's like an internal cooldown. How long is the cooldown? Yeah, it's like 2 seconds. Yeah. So you get a little bit of super every time you get a kill. I think if we do the math, it's like what? How long does that take? 33. Yeah, so it takes you about a minute, right? A minute and change to get a full super, if I'm not mistaken, if you were constantly getting kills. Now, that being said, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the fact that if you're using Sunbracers or Vesper, you can get a super a lot faster than in a minute. And they don't require you to get weapon kills consistently for a minute straight that match your subclass. So, the super generation aspect of this exotic is not as useful as it might look on the face, because you have stuff like Ashes to Assets, you have stuff like Dynamo, you have stuff like Distribution, which will help you get your super a lot faster. Now the surge thing is a bit nice, right? If your super is full, you do get X4 matching surge every time you get a kill, but again, it's pretty niche, right? It's pretty niche. You can get pretty consistent surges without that, even if they're 22% instead of 25. So yeah, pretty niche exotic. I don't think this is a particularly useful exotic in endgame content, but I don't think they're terrible either. So I think we have gone ahead and placed them in the C tier, at the bottom of C tier. So they're ranked 26th. I'm going to go ahead and place them right underneath Geomags, and we're going to move on to Necrotic Grips, or Necrotic Grip. Okay. Necrotic Grip, this exotic has seen kind of a resurgence recently. I think a lot of people didn't really pay much attention to this exotic pre-Lightfall. I guess they used it with like Osteostriga, but ever since Strand Warlock, and Weaver's Trance became a thing, and that Osteo Suspend Blast thing became a thing on Necrotic Grip, people have paid more attention to this thing, and a lot of people have cited it as being useful with Strand Warlock for DPS. Now, I will say it's kind of overrated. Necrotic is very much an exotic that you pick when you just have nothing else to pick, for damage at least, right? If we're talking Broodweaver damage, people are like, oh my god, it's so good with Strand Warlock. Not really. All you're doing is, because you have Threat of Ascent, you don't really need Ophidians. You can have one person per team put this on, you get like a tiny bit of extra damage, right? So it's like, I think it's quite overrated, right? And in endgame content, you're likely not using a Necrotic Grip build for neutral gameplay, because if you're on a Warlock in endgame content, you're playing optimally, there are much better exotics to use, and you're probably not using Strand Warlock in terms of neutral gameplay in endgame content either. So Necrotic Grip is really, in terms of if you're just playing optimally, it's really just used for Strand Warlock DPS, and even in that capacity, it's relatively restricted. Necrotic has some utility in some speedrunning instances, like, for Kali trapping and stuff like that, but I'm not going to really give it a lot of points for that. So, we're going to go ahead and put Necrotic Grip. I believe I placed them in the B tier. Yeah, in the B tier. We're going to place them right underneath Fallen Sunstar, just because of their overall usage that exists. Okay, next up we have, what do we have? Nezarec Sin. Okay. Nezarec Sin is like, it's just an ability regen exotic that requires you to get void kills. It's not bad, right? It's not bad. It's one of the common ways that people use on Warlock to just get a super quickly. It's been used for a long time in speedrunning to just get a super quickly in a variety of encounters. I remember seeing it in like Leviathan speedruns when I first started playing the game. And I'm like, oh, okay, they're using that exotic to get like a Chaos Reach for like baths. But, you know, besides that, these days there's way faster ways to get your super, and anything that requires you to constantly be getting kills immediately falls off in like high power content, or low power content I should say. So Nezarec Sin kind of falls off in that regard. That being said, its effect is relatively easy to proc, and it does stack up to 20 seconds, which means that it's not like an exotic like Mantle of Battle Harmony where you need to get a kill every 2 seconds. You can get a bunch of kills and it'll extend your timer a bunch, and then you don't need to get as many kills for a longer period of time. That being said, I don't think this thing is really useful in like anything nowadays. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the D tier. Yeah, I mentioned Mantle of Battle Harmony as a comparison, but at least Mantle has the surge effect. Nezarec just has ability regen. Okay, next up we have Nothing Manacles. Nothing Manacles, it gives you the Chaos Accelerant modifier to your scatter grenades, which is actually a bad thing for scatter grenades, because that actually decreases the damage that they do, even if it helps with the tracking. And an extra scatter grenade ability charge is like not really useful, because scatter grenades kind of suck, especially in PvE. Like maybe people use them in PvP, but like these things kind of suck in PvE. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and put these things in the F tier. I'm gonna go ahead and put them underneath Chromatic Fire, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, underneath Chromatic Fire, and I'm gonna leave it at that. Okay, Ophids are up next. So Ophids are a kind of a unique exotic because they are very much just a stat stick, right? Ophids do one thing, okay? They boost your handling and they boost your reload. They boost 2 stats. I guess that's 2 things. I don't know. We'll count as one thing, okay? They boost your stats, okay? Reload, not that important, right? I mean, they're feel good, I guess, but reload, not that important. You have stuff like Rain of Fire, which is, better. But the handling, right? Plus 35 handling. If you have nothing else to use on Warlock, which Warlock doesn't really have any like damage super boosting exotics that you would use like Curus or like Star Eater Scales, so Ophids kind of is a natural choice. And of course the fact that you can place your well on Lunafactions and then switch to a different exotic, Ophids is a common choice outside of Rain of Fire, so Ophids is very, very common. That being said, Ophids lack versatility, right? That's pretty much all they're used for. They're just a feel-good exotic. Yeah, they're just a no activation requirement handling boost, which is kind of useful in its own right. So I'm gonna put it at the bottom of B tier. Notice how the tier break between B and C tier is like C tier is stuff that almost doesn't have a use, whereas B tier is stuff that's not necessarily insanely useful but does have a solidified use, if that makes sense. Okay. Not to box the tiers in too much, but I hope that kind of makes sense if we're comparing like something like Briarbinds and Ophidians. Okay, next up we have Osmiomancy Gloves. Osmiomancies, in terms of having an extra grenade charge, having 2 turret grenade charges is really good actually. I'd say out of all of these stasis exotics on all 3 classes, I think Osmiomancy is the best, mostly because I am a strong believer that Bleak Watcher, if we're going to play CC, I think is the best CC ability, mostly because you can throw it into a lane or throw it into a group of enemies and then not have to think about it, which is like half the reason you play CC. That being said, it is attached to Stasis, and Stasis Warlock, Stasis in general is just not very strong right now. If Stasis gets a rework, so maybe like shatter damage just like way more, or frozen enemies just take like a lot more damage or something like that, there might be some offensive utility to Osmiomancy in the future. But right now, all it is, it's like a turret exotic. You just get a lot of turrets back, and you can throw cold snaps at enemies and you get a lot of cold snap energy back as well. So outside of being absolutely annoying to face in PvP, these exotics are not really used much in endgame content. That being said, I'm going to place them probably higher than you might expect given my description. I'm going to place them in the B tier. I'm going to place them above Ophidians because there are some low man scenarios and some scenarios where you just do want a lot of turrets and you do want to freeze enemies when you're like not there, for example. Duo Gatekeepers comes to mind, for example. Okay, next up, we are going to talk about Phoenix Protocol. Okay, so I'm definitely gonna, this is probably gonna be the most controversial placement I think in this list. Maybe not. Phoenix Protocol I think is strongly overrated. I've been saying this for a long time. Phoenix Protocol was very, very strong back in the day when you could get 80%, 90% of your super back during year 4. Ever since the super energy got capped to 50%, it's taken a nosedive, right? Because in the same amount of time that it takes for you to get half your super energy capped back using Phoenix Protocol, you can just get kills using grenades on like something like Sunbracers or something like that, and you'll get almost your entire super back rather than just 50%, right? So Phoenix Protocol, I just struggle to find a use for it. Some people say it's good in day ones, but in day ones, if you're doing damage to a boss, right, you're going to just get your super energy back from doing damage to the boss regardless because of the super energy changes. That's number one. And number two, if you're doing damage to a boss, you're not killing anything. So you're not even going to proc Phoenix's effect. And number three, if you're using well in like an exploration encounter, something like Exhibition, most of those encounters these days focus on movement and active and dynamic gameplay. You're generally not going to be sitting in a well just doing nothing and killing ads. So there are some encounters, like Day 1 Totems comes to mind, for example, in King's Fall, but those are few and far in between. Phoenix Protocol doesn't have much use in GMs if you're playing optimally. It doesn't have any use in speedruns if you're playing optimally for the most part. And even on day one, it's very situational, right? So I think it's good. It's a good exotic, right? It's definitely like a no-brainer. Like if you want to place your well and just have a lot of your well back, as long as there's enemies spawning, there's some use. But you know, I'd probably rather play a different exotic that, if you're playing like an exploration encounter, is better for Actor, aka Sunbracers. So I'm gonna go ahead and put Phoenix Protocol in the B tier, and it's pretty high up in the B tier, I believe. It's like oh no, it's kind of in the middle of the B tier. Yeah, we're gonna place it above Ballidorse and below Felwinters. Okay. Next up, we have Promethium Spur. Okay, Promethium Spur is frequently referred to as the worst exotic on Warlock. And, you know, I can't say I disagree. This exotic is basically focused around killing enemies to get your Rift, and then whenever you have your Rift and you kill something, it spawns an Emp Rift and a Healing Rift at the same time on the corpse of the enemy that you killed. Now, I guess the idea, the power fantasy behind this exotic is like a roaming assassin, where like you kill an enemy, and then it makes a new place of safety for you to go sit. You go sit in that Rift, and then you kill more enemies, and you're kind of leapfrogging from Rift to Rift to Rift to Rift. So I think it's kind of a cool idea, but in actual practice, it doesn't really play out that way. The ability regen isn't as strong as I think Bungie thinks it is, and of course, there are other ways to just get your Rift back. Like Starfire gives you your entire Rift back for just getting a grenade kill, and it also boosts your grenades and gives you 2 of them, right? So, you know, it's kind of dodgy, it's kind of questionable. Promethium Spur is not like the worst thing in the world, but you know, I don't disagree with people that it's probably the worst. You know, it's probably the worst Warlock exotic. Now, that being said, is this exotic as bad as some of the other like worst exotics? Like I said, worst thing in the world on the other classes? No, but I think it is quite annoying that, you know, it takes away your Rift from you. It takes agency away from the player, which can be very annoying on stuff like, you know, Loreley I mentioned, for example, takes away your barricade, kind of outside of your control. So that's kind of annoying. Okay, next up we have Rain of Fire. Okay, Rain of Fire, I've been singing, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna take a little bit of credit here, okay? I've been singing Rain of Fire's praises since the day it came out. The second I saw this exotic, I was like, this exotic is the best neutral Warlock exotic in the game. Whether you're speedrunning, even in some champ content, even in some low power content, Rain of Fire is insane. Okay, Rain of Fire is insane. There are very few exotics, abilities, anything really in the game that reload all of your weapons, right? You have Rain of Fire does that, Shoot to Loot does that, and Dragon's Shadow does that, okay? Dragon's Shadow has a much longer cooldown, and Shoot to Loot requires you to have a Shoot to Loot weapon, number one, and number two, you have to actually shoot a brick, right? Rain of Fire does this every 4 seconds, or technically every 2 seconds on average if you're counting Heat Rises, for free. For free. You don't do anything. You don't use an ability, unless you count an air move as an ability. That's not really an ability, right? So it's for free, right? And on top of that, it works with both Icarus Dash and Weave Walk, so it works with 2 subclasses, which are both strong subclasses, by the way. And it also gives you Radiant for free on fusion kills. Now, the Radiant for free thing is very limited in its use. Some people use it in Lost Sectors and stuff like that to get free Radiant, but Radiant's pretty easy to get regardless, so not that important. But being able to get a free weapon refresh on all 3 of your weapons just for Icarus dashing is incredibly useful. It basically, like normally a refresh, a weapon refresh effect is still kind of limited in its usefulness because of the cooldown. Rain of Fire takes the cooldown and says, fuck you, okay? The cooldown is so short that it basically bypasses the like reload disadvantage to almost every weapon in the game, right? It makes weapons like Fourth Horseman have insanely higher DPS. It makes weapons like Parasite, Rockets, all of these weapons that have slow manual reloads, it just takes all of that game balancing. It takes all of that sandbox balancing and says fuck you and just bypasses it completely. And on top of that, Icarus Dash is an incredibly fast animation as well. So if you're using this thing for something like DPS, Icarus Dash is very, very low damage downtime. This is just a fantastic exotic. It's borders on gameplay defining, to be honest with you. It enables a bunch of damage rotations that aren't normally possible. It enables you to play at a higher quality of life that is normally possible. I'd take it over Ophids any day of the week, to be honest with you. It lowers all of any weapon reload basically gets lowered to like 800 milliseconds, which is around the amount of time that an Icarus Dash takes. So this thing is insane. Yeah, I'm gonna stop glazing it now. We're gonna put it in the A tier. We're gonna put it in the A tier, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, I don't think it's an S tier exotic, mostly because you're not gonna catch anyone using this thing in like solo content, but you know, it's an A tier exotic. Okay, all right. It's a lot of yapping. Let's move on to Sanguine Alchemy. Sanguine Alchemy. Okay, Sanguine Alchemy I think is very overrated. A lot of people, I mentioned this in my buff structuring video when I was talking about how you can use it to get 2 of your subclass surge, and then you run like 3 kinetic surge on like Izzy Rocket. That being said, having, you know, our weapon sandbox right now is so leaning towards your heavy weapon that having like 3 kinetic surge and 2 like solar surge, for example, for like Apex is almost the same as just running 3 solar surge and like no kinetic surges, to be honest with you. So, you know, there might be some niche use for this, right? And it's nice to have just surge on command with no armor charge or anything like that, but this exotic is relatively limited, and in terms of DPS, I don't think I'd ever take Sanguine Alchemy over something like Ophids or Rain of Fire or Necrotic, right? So very, very niche in terms of DPS. And in terms of like giving you an infinite duration rift off of kills, I think Boots of the Assembler just does that better, right? It doesn't require kills. It just requires your homies to stand in your rift with you or like be near you. So, and Boots of the Assembler obviously has other effects that are even more useful than that. So, yeah, Sanguine Alchemy I think is pretty overrated. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the C tier, and we're gonna leave it, I think, right above Astrocyte Verse, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, right above Astrocyte Verse. Okay, next up we have Secant Filaments. Okay, Secant Filaments are actually pretty cool. I like Secant Filaments. I'm a little bit partial to them. That being said, I'm not going to rank them highly because they're not insane. Basically, they make all of your weapons have overload if you're in an Empowering Rift, which can be useful in nowhere, but it's cool, I guess. And you get free Devour, right? It's I think it's like the only way in the game to get instant Devour now. I don't think you can... I mean, back then, obviously, you could consume your grenade on bottom Nova to get instant Devour. I don't think there's any way to get instant Devour anymore with no orbs or void breaches or anything like that. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of cool. But again, you're using your entire armor exotic slot just to get Devour on your Rift or to get like Overload on your Rift. Like, yeah, it's a little bit silly. I don't know. If Overload was much, you know, much rarer, I guess, and much more difficult to come by, maybe this would be more useful. But for now, you know, Secant Filaments is just, it's cool, it's quirky, but it's not useful, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and put Secant Filaments in the D tier. I'm going to put it in the D tier, and we're going to leave it right above Apotheosis Veil. Yeah, right above Apotheosis Veil. That is ranked 32nd. Okay. Okay, how many exotics do we have left? We have like 10, 11, something like that. Okay. Skull of Dire Ahamkara. This is a Nova Bomb exotic. It's similar to Phoenix Protocol, and, you know, it gives you back your super energy, capped to a certain point. Capped to 50% based on the number of kills you get. Now, Nova Bomb is very much a super that you kind of just toss because you have it. And it's certainly not a super that's so valuable that you'd want to dedicate your entire exotic to getting it back. In fact, there are very few supers in Destiny 2 now that are so useful that you want to dedicate your exotic to getting them back. I don't think there's a single super actually in the game right now that is so useful that you want to dedicate your whole exotic to getting it back. So Nova Bomb is certainly not on that list, even if that list did exist. And the only extra benefit it does besides returning super energy is you get damage resistance while you're in your Nova Bomb, which is like, okay. Like, I don't think anyone cares about that. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put this thing in the F tier. Like, it boosts the super in a way that's not useful, and that super is also just not a super that's like meta right now at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it, yeah, in the F tier. I don't think it's even worth swapping to this exotic in activities where you can swap to this exotic to use it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Skull of Dire, and we're gonna move on. Okay. Starfire Protocol is up next. Starfire Protocol is a little bit difficult to place. Yeah, Starfire Protocol obviously got a huge nerf. I think they like reduced the amount of grenade energy you get per hit by like tenfold or something. Yeah, like a pretty insane amount. It's almost unnoticeable how much grenade energy you get back while you're in your Emprift and like hitting enemies now. That being said, I think they did an okay job. I think they obviously nerfed it a little bit too much, but they kind of tried to shift Starfire from being a damage exotic into more of a roam exotic where you get more benefits from killing enemies than you do from like damaging them, which I think was a good decision on their part. I think Starfire has always been a better exotic for roam gameplay. And I think really the strongest thing about Starfire has always been the fact that you get your entire Rift cooldown back for one grenade kill, right? That's always been a very, very strong aspect of Starfire. That being said, you know, in its current state, especially with the way the meta has kind of shifted towards stuff like Sunbracers and rockets, Starfire really doesn't have much of a place. And in my opinion, the people who still use it for damage by proccing Benevolence are coping really hard. This thing is like not good for boss damage. Please stop using it for boss damage. It's not good. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about Starfire Protocol. It's just an alternative exotic. It's like barely B tier for me. I placed it above Ophidians. It's like second last in B tier. I think this thing is really hugely overrated now. I think people underrated it when it got nerfed. They assumed it was just completely unusable. I don't think it's that bad, but then I don't know, I saw some content creators making content about how like you can get pre-nerf Starfire using Benevolence. And it's just like, yeah, but you can also just use Verity's Brow or like, you know, any other exotic in proc Benevolence. So I don't know. I think Starfire is pretty overrated. Yeah, so let's move on. Let's talk about Stormdancer's Brace. Stormdancer's Brace. Where do we have that? Stormdancer's Brace. Okay. This thing is basically just a super damage buffing exotic that requires you to scale off of kills, which is really weird because Stormtrance is not really an exotic that you imagine that you'd use for killing like mini bosses or for doing boss damage. So the fact that this exotic is entirely dependent on you killing smaller enemies and then going up to a bigger enemy and tickling it is a bit awkward. I don't think that really makes sense in terms of like the Stormtrance identity. I mean, I guess like maybe in a GM, no, I mean, I don't know. This is just so silly, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, because this exotic does nothing. It does nothing for you outside of returning super energy. It gives you no neutral gameplay benefits. I think Bungie would do good by rolling this exotic's effects into another arc exotic that actually does have neutral gameplay benefits, and then probably reworking this exotic in some way. Or, I don't know, rolling another exotic into this exotic's benefits, because as it stands, this thing seems like kind of half an exotic right now with how strong the other exotics are in the game in the upper tiers. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and put Stormdancer's Brace in the F tier. We're going to put it, I believe, right underneath Dawn Chorus. Yeah, because Dawn Chorus has an actual neutral effect. That is useful. Okay, next up we have, I think Sunbracers? Yeah, Sunbracers. Okay, Sunbracers are, I mean, I don't think it's any surprise, like the best neutral gameplay Warlock exotic, usable in GMs if you really want, usable in all champ content, usable in day ones, usable in speedrunning, usable in literally everything. They're just really great. Touch of Flame solar grenades are probably the best ad clear, general ad clear ranged splash option in the game right now. And all you need is a powered melee kill, which is pretty easy to get with Snap. And they fixed it to work with Celestial Fire properly now, which is really great because you can do it from range now, so it's a lot safer. And yeah, this is just a fantastic exotic. I don't really have much to say about this thing. And just like old Starfire, it breaks the meta by basically redefining how cooldowns work. So really, really great. I'm going to go ahead and put Sunbracers in the S tier. Not a surprise to anyone, I hope, right? Sunbracers S tier. Okay, let's move on and talk about Swarmers. Okay, so Swarmers, I don't know, some people were mentioning this as like a Broodweaver exotic that you can use for damage when it first came out. They were talking about you can use it for like roaming gameplay on Strand Warlock. I'm gonna be honest with you, Swarmers are a pitiful excuse of a subclass interacting exotic. Destroying a Tangle to spawn 2 Threadlings. First of all, Tangle cooldown is still kind of long for that, and Tangles are not very good in endgame content outside of movement stuff, which is pretty niche and does not involve Swarmers in any way. And your Threadlings applying Unravel, I mean, we're talking about a class that applies Unravel on a triple charge melee. So Swarmers are like, why are you using these? And the only reason you would use these is because Strand Warlock doesn't really have any exotics that interact with it very well. So you're kind of just coping and using Swarmers. But again, I'd rather use Necrotics or Ophids or like anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and put Swarmers in the D tier. We're going to put them in the D tier. I'm going to place them right above I Have Another World, I believe. Yeah, they are ranked 30th. Okay. Next up, we have the Stag. Okay, I think the Stag is actually a little bit underrated. Where's the Stag on the spreadsheet? Oh, there it is. Oh, they put it up here because, okay, I guess they don't count the as like starting with T. That makes sense. Okay, so the Stag I think is kind of underrated. Number one, it gives you an insane amount of Rift regen, right? Just hitting critical gives you half your Rift back, right? Which in some endgame content, you are hitting critical, you know, sometimes, relatively, you know, frequently. And it is one of the easiest ways to get a free, relatively decent DR stack from just placing a Rift, right? So think about stuff like Day 1 Crota, right? Day 1 Crota, you place a Rift inside your well, you have increased DR, you're getting to critical a lot if Crota's hitting you, for example, in a Day 1. So I think the Stag is kind of underrated for cases like that. And it's a pretty easy way to get, to get your Rift back pretty quickly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just a DR exotic, pretty decent and very easy to get DR using Strand, without being on Strand, I should say, without using Woven Mail. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the Stag in the B tier, I believe. Yeah, in the B tier. We're gonna go ahead and put the Stag right between Osmio and Ballidorse. Yeah, that's all I have to say about the Stag. Let's move on to T-Steps. T-Steps, the speedrunner favorite. T-Steps, in my opinion, I mean, these days, the sprint speed and slide distance increase of T-Steps is not particularly useful in speedrunning as much anymore as it used to be. Back when neutral sword skating was really important speedrunning, sprinting was pretty important speedrunning, T-Steps were used a lot. These days, with how broken sword movement is, T-Steps are not as important to have on glued to your feet all the time. Speedrunners obviously pride themselves on running T-Steps all the time, having a good stat split T-Steps, but that's mostly just for show. It's not actually that important if you're speedrunning, and in general, in encounters at least, I would much rather have Rain of Fire. The sprint reload is like cool on T-Steps. It's useful for weapons where you don't want to stop moving while you're reloading, but Icarus Dash also kind of just does that and reloads all of your weapons and not just one of them, and doesn't require you to sprint for 1.5 seconds. So, you know, I think Rain of Fire is a much more applicable exotic than T-Steps are. So I'm going to go ahead and put T-Steps in the B tier, and we're going to place them right at the top of B tier. No. Where do they go? They go in between Felwinter's Helm and Phoenix Protocol, I believe. Yeah, right over here. Yeah. Okay, 4 exotics left. The next one is probably going to make people a little bit upset as well. I did make a video on Verity's Brow, I don't know, like maybe last year or like earlier this year, where, you know, I sang its praises. I said Verity's Brow is very good, and it's usable for like team building and stuff like that. And while I haven't necessarily changed my opinion that much, I think a lot of people have taken Verity's Brow and run it way too far and overhyped it way too much. Okay, so first of all, I would like to address 2 things. Okay, number one, a lot of people think that Verity's Brow as a damage strategy is a top tier competing damage strategy, and while I would like to think that this is true, it is not true. Okay, the only reason I know a lot of you have watched me do speedruns, and you've seen me and my teammates use Verity's Brow a lot. We use it on Atheon in Vault of Glass. We use it on like half the bosses in King's Fall. Like we use it on Oryx. We use it on Daughters. We use it on Golgoroth. It's used in Vow on both Caretaker and Rulk. But the only reason it's used on these bosses is either because, number one, those bosses have grenade modifiers. For example, Atheon takes 3 times the normal grenade damage compared to other weapon sources or other damage sources, or because we are limited on ammo and we are forced to use Solar Warlock. That is the only reason why Verities is used in those scenarios. And so I have a lot of people asking me all the time, hey, is Verities competing with Rockets, or is Verities competing with this and that? Guys, Verity's Brow is not actually a very strong top tier damage strategy. It is used in speedrunning because of limitations or because of encounter benefits, encounter specific benefits. So Vow, you have Into the Light. Atheon, I already mentioned that. And then in King's Fall, for example, in Daughters, we have 3 people that start the encounter on swords and 1 person is dead. So the 3 people that start on swords, they're not going to have shit for heavy ammo. So what do they have to use? They have to use Verity's Brow because they're forced to use ability damage. Okay, and that's probably going to change if quick swapping doesn't get patched either. So Verity's Brow is very much a coping mechanism for ammo restrictions, or it's used just to exploit the fact that some bosses take more grenade damage. It is not good generally speaking, and I think people have overhyped it a little bit too much. That being said, if we have a sandbox where grenade damage becomes extremely potent again, for example, Heart of Inmost Light Storm Grenades pre-nerf, then Verity's Brow is very good. It's like Hoyle, right? If Titans ever get a grenade that's very strong, Hoyle will become very good again. If another, grenade comes out that's also very strong, Verity's Brow will become good because you're boosting your allies, where you're giving them basically infinite grenade regen. That being said, right now in today's sandbox, there aren't really you know, we're not really focused too much on grenades. We're focused on rockets, and we're focused on Titan melees. Okay, so that's number one. That's the first point. The second point is that Verity's Brow, in terms of neutral gameplay, like using it in GMs and stuff like that, while I did have fun using it on stuff like G-Horn, throwing infinite healing grenades, Cenotaph Mask is much more useful as a general neutral exotic, just so you can spam more heavy. There's nothing better in a day one than spamming rockets at enemies, okay? Fusion grenades are great. Listen, fusion grenades are great. I love fusion grenades, but nothing is better in a day one in terms of ad clear than just spamming rockets, especially for stuff like mini bosses. So Cenotaph is a better general neutral gameplay exotic in my opinion, especially in activities where you have mini bosses in, you know, a plentiful quantity. I think Verity's Brow is pretty overrated. That being said, I'm just saying I'm not going to put it in the S tier. It's not in the S tier. It's very situational. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the A tier, put it underneath Lunafaction Boots, and we'll call it at that. Okay, next up we have Vesper of Radius. I talked a lot about Verities. Okay, next up we have Vesper of Radius. Vesper of Radius is, you know, it had kind of a come up recently because of Arc Warlock and of course Electric Armor being very, very good on Vesper of Radius. It was like a free AFK exotic where you could just keep placing rifts in your enemies, get free grenade energy, free rift energy, everything's blind, you have damage resist. It was a good exotic, right? It's still a good exotic, even without Electric Armor being present. And before, you know, Arc 3.0 and all this, you know, crazy stuff, Vesper of Radius was still used to get a super very quickly. You can use it with triple dynamo and triple distribution, and you get your Phoenix dive back very quickly, and you get your super back very quickly. You get it in like 6 or 7 dives, if not less. So Vesper of Radius was used in speedrunning even before it was good for neutral gameplay. And now on Arc Warlock, now that it blinds enemies and it chains this blinding effect repeatedly, Vesper of Radius has become a neutral gameplay exotic as well. So it's, you know, on one of these stronger, I would say, solo, you know, ad clear / solo player oriented Warlock subclasses. I think it's the best one to use. It has blinding built in. It has rift regen built in, so you have constant Arc Soul uptime. It's just a good exotic overall. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the A tier, and I'm going to go ahead and put it at the top of A tier. I think it's a very solid exotic. Okay. Next up, we have Wings of Sacred Dawn, and then we have Winter's Guile, and we're free from Warlock. Okay, so Wings of Sacred Dawn is kind of a joke. A lot of people have also written this off as one of the worst Warlock exotics. Now, that being said, they did buff Tome of Dawn, like the floaty thing, recently, where now if you get a kill while you are held in place with those wings out, you refill all your solar weapons. So some people were like, hey, wouldn't this be good with, like, you know, Eyes of Tomorrow, or wouldn't it be good with like Galley? And then I'm like, Rain of Fire exists, and they're like, oh. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and put this in the F tier. Yeah, there's no reason to use this thing. Okay. Next up, we have Winter's Guile. Winter's Guile is the Worm God equivalent for Warlock. Hunters don't really have one. And yeah, oh wait, I just realized something, guys. I just realized something. Claws of Ahamkara is not the exotic that got the Penumbral Blast interaction. It's Winter's Guile that did. That being said, that's not particularly useful on Warlock either. I don't think you're really getting your Penumbral Blast back quickly enough to really make use of Winter's Guile that usefully. That being said, Winter's Guile is good on Snap. It's good on Snap melee. It's used in speedrunning. It's used in, for example, Shattered Throne first encounter, in pretty much all the categories, if I'm not mistaken. The way, you know, Heat Rises gives you back your melee very quickly, as well as Ember of Searing. You can use Winter's Guile to basically just nuke a bunch of mini bosses in a row, provided you have enough ads. So, you know, it does have some use in endgame content. It is actually used in endgame content a lot, unlike a lot of the other melee exotics that are very situational. That being said, it is very niche, and currently, right now, the only place that I'm aware of it being used in optimal endgame content is, in fact, Throne First Encounter. So, if we ever get, you know, some crazy builds with it in the future that are very strong, we might put it up higher. But for now, I'm going to put it in the C tier, right underneath Briarbinds. And yeah, that's pretty much it for a Warlock. Yeah, I think this is probably maybe like a little bit less controversial than the Titan tier list. I'm not sure though. This list is subject to change. It will probably change next season when we get some changes to the Warlock exotics. We get a new Warlock exotic. I will be revisiting these every season. I'll be taking the feedback that you guys leave me in the comments and in the stream, and probably readjusting where these exotics go. But as it stands, I'm pretty happy with this tier list for now. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one where we talk about Hunter exotics.